Today we're going to cover Form 22AD, which is for low appraisal. And I always, when I talk about this topic and train on it, I always start with Form 22A, because what Form 22AD is doing is it's modifying paragraph 5 in the financing contingency. So when I'm explaining it to a consumer, I always start, Chris, with like what the circumstance is before we ever introduce an AD. So like what their protections and provisions are, because I don't want them to feel like anytime the appraisal is low, it's 100% their problem, because it's not. It's actually shared, right? And I'll walk you through the low appraisal language first. So this clause is designed to get triggered anytime there's a low appraisal. And what it says is, the buyer, once they get an appraisal that's low, they agree to notify the seller of that and provide the appraisal, right? Provide a copy of lender's appraisal within 3 days, and they can use Form 22AN to do that. So 22AN is just the notice of low appraisal. So you would, if you were the buyer's agent, you would send the 22AN with the appraisal to the listing broker. Normally you'd precede it with a phone call though, right? Because you want to maintain whatever rapport you had is going to serve you during this negotiation too, right? Because we build rapport before we ever submit the offer. Hopefully we got chosen because they liked us. And then we want that to hopefully sustain as much as we can, because this is bad news, right? And in the end, this is problematic for both buyer and seller. So what the seller then can do is they have 4 options once they receive this notice, right? And they have 10 days to figure it out. The reason that time frame is so long is because one of the options is a new appraisal, right? So the seller can get a new appraisal. The seller can simply say yes to the lower price, right? And sometimes that's easy because it only came in low by $5,000 or whatever it was. The seller can suggest maybe splitting it somehow, and they don't specify how much each party's going to play, but they're basically saying you can negotiate it, right? Or the seller can just say, tough, I'm not doing anything. And that's the scenario where the buyer gets to decide, do I want to just handle this because I want the house that badly? Or the buyer can actually terminate and retain their earnest money. So that's the framework of this form without any modification. Now, what started to happen, you know, we've been in the seller's market for 5 years now. What started to happen is buyers would preemptively say, hey, and if there's a low appraisal, I'll cover the first X dollars, right? So the MLS said, well, that's happening common enough that in April of last year, they said, well, let's just put a form together that people can use. So Form 22AD is designed to modify paragraph 5, right? And so what it says is the buyer agrees to cover the first X dollars. And then I always use default for the other 2 fields, right? You can change them if you want, but absent any logical reason to put a different number into these fields, use the default number. So what I'm saying with this form, if I include it in my offer, is, hey, let's say your list price was 600 and I won and I said 650, use an escalator or whatever to get to 650. I'm telling the seller I'll cover the first 10 grand. So let's just pretend that it appraised for 625. Now we know there's a $25,000 shortfall, right? And kind of take a step back and think of it from a macro view. Well, what does that mean? What does that matter? Well, it matters because the lender's underwriting guidelines, the #1 underwriting guideline, it's literally the first guideline in any underwriting manual, says, we will lend X% to this buyer, and that percentage will be based on the purchase price or the appraised value, whichever is lower. So in my example, my client, let's say, was putting 10% down. They were they were offering 650. They were going to put $65,000 down, right? And they were going to get a loan for 585. Well, now it appraised for 625 in my example, if I can find my calculator. 625 times 0.9 is 562,500. So their loan amount just went down by 22,500. As an aside, 22.5 is 90% of 25,000, right? So the way I want you thinking about it is whatever the borrower's loan to value is, they're going to have to come out of pocket for a shortfall unless they can get the seller to agree to cover some of it. So back to my example, $625,000 appraisal. We preemptively said we would cover the first 10 grand, right? Now the seller has to decide, do they want to eat the other 15 or do we split that? Maybe we split that, right? The seller says, I'm not eating 15, but I'll cover 7,500 of it. Now the buyer has to cover the 10 plus 7,500 or 17.5. You following? Right? So all we're doing with the 22 AD is giving the seller peace of mind that they're not going to have to fight with us for some portion of the purchase or of the shortfall, right? So we could say, hey, you listed for 600, we offered 650, and we'll cover every nickel if it doesn't appraise for more than 600, right? That's a powerful statement. But all of this factors back to whether the buyer has the money or not, right? Because they still have to cover the down payment plus the shortfall or whatever portion of the shortfall they agree to cover. So now let's talk about how do I explain this to my clients? Because my comment to Chris before we started the recording was we always want to give the client sort of an idea of what the terms are to begin with, and then what we're doing to modify those terms if we choose. So the conversation goes like this, you know, and I have this conversation early and often because it can be a concept that's hard for buyers to wrap their mind around. Shoot, it could be a concept that's hard for realtors to wrap their minds around, right? So what I tell them is, okay, when we write this offer, we have the option. One of the things that we can do to strengthen our offer is to preemptively tell the seller that we will cover some portion of a shortfall should the appraisal come in low. Because what the contract says currently is if the appraisal comes in low, both parties agree to come back to the negotiating table and work it out. And it doesn't obligate either party to absorb the shortfall, but it says both parties can come back together and try and work it out. And if they can't, then the buyer can terminate and keep their earnest money. So that's what it says today. But what we could do, client, is we could add an addendum that says, hey, if it comes in low, we'll cover the first X dollars of any shortfall. And that will make our offer more attractive to the next guy if he doesn't say that, right? So it's a great way to stand out. And the other thing I should make sure you understand is I've always already done a CMA on this home. If we got to this point and we're writing an offer, I've already done a CMA. So I'm already able to say, hey, and I think it's going to appraise for at least 630. So we're only talking about 20 grand here or whatever it is, right? I've had them where I said, we're going to put a 22 AD in this offer, but I don't even think the appraisal is going to come in low. And it didn't, right? So you have the skills and the ability to forecast to some degree what it's going to appraise for. And I say to some degree because you get 10 appraisals from 10 different appraisers, you're going to get 10 different answers. So you never know exactly, right? But you can look at the comps and go, okay, is this going to be an issue? And then you let that sink in. So now you've said to your client, hey, we can do this and we can cover the first percentage or X dollars. How do you feel about that? And some of them are going to say, well, I don't have any more money. Like, I'm putting 3.5% down and that's every nickel I've got. So I can't do that. Okay, then we're not going to include a 22 AD for these folks, right? But if they have money or they're putting more than minimum down, then they do have the ability to divert funds over to the seller and maybe take a higher loan to value. And I actually built, I won't put it in this video, but I built a spreadsheet so that I could show people who had a hard time of wrapping their minds around this, how a low appraisal would affect their out of pocket. And it actually calculates for every $5,000 low, what the incremental increase in loan to value is. And that allows buyers to sort of see, okay, yeah, so it could come in 15 grand low and not affect my terms. Because it's not until you get to, you know, the concept is if I'm putting 20% down, but I have to give the seller some money, I could put 15% down and still have the same loan amount, right? Because the low appraisal just means my LTV has to go up if I'm going to keep the same loan amount. But I'll cover that in more detail in another video. So anyway, I've now painted the image of what the contract says, and I've painted the image in their mind of how 22 AD modifies that. And then we just have a conversation about what number to fill in here. And like I said, some clients are going to say, I don't have any money. Others are going to say, well, could we cover everything between what we offered and what they asked, you know, what the list price was? And the answer is sure, if you have the funds. In the end, it may not even get triggered, right? It all depends on what the appraisal comes in at. We're just saying ahead of time that if it's an issue, we agree to cover the first X dollars. And then the appraisal comes in. I can count literally on one hand how many low appraisals I've had in the last 2 years. It's amazing that appraisers are able to bring them in with the bidding wars that we've seen, right? People paying 200 grand over asking. We had one of our Chinese brokers wrote an offer, $1.6 million list price. They wrote an offer at 2.2 million, 600 grand over, and they lost by 300,000. Somebody wrote 2.5 on a 1.6 list price, $900,000 over asking. They would have a low appraisal, but they're probably cash buyers. So let me open it up to questions, Chris or anyone else. Does this make sense? Does this raise any questions in your mind?
All makes sense to me.
All right. And do you see kind of the nuanced difference between what you said, which was effectively, if appraisal comes in low, you'd have to cover that amount, which isn't true, right? I mean, it could be true. So it's not like you were misleading them, but you're painting a negative image unnecessarily because you want them to feel like they've got the power to negotiate. All that being said, I want them to put as big a number as they're able in this field because it helps our chances. But some people are going to say, all I can do is an extra 1,000, and that's okay. It helps. It's worth putting it in there, right? And I'll tell you why it's worth putting it in there. When you're submitting an offer, you want to have a posture of, I want as many positives in my offer as I can scrape together. When we put that cover email together that highlights all the benefits, right? This allows me to add another bullet point of, hey, and we've included a 22 AD in case the appraisal comes in low. I don't say how much. If it were an impressive number, I'd say how much in the cover email. But if it's not, I don't say how much. I just say that it's there because that's all going to help paint a perception in the listing broker's mind of, man, this is a strong offer. Any other questions before I stop the recording?
Could the shortfall be addressed with maybe a gift from a family member or something, or?
Yeah, in the end, whatever the buyer agrees to cover, it's going to be up to your lender to decide what are acceptable sources of funds, just like with any other required down payment or closing costs or whatever. So it could depend on what loan product they have. It could depend on the lender. Gift funds are usually acceptable, but it just depends, because some loan products say, you know, you can have 100% gift funds. Other products say buyer has to have at least 5% and the rest can be gift. It just depends.
And then if this scenario does happen, then you have to call for an extension maybe? Do you think that would extend the?
Well, not necessarily. It just depends on how long it takes to negotiate, right? But theoretically, the appraisal comes in low, we notify the seller, and we could agree to a splitting of the difference in the first conversation, potentially, right? Because remember, I'm calling before I send the 22AN, because I want to break the news softly to the listing broker. And the listing broker probably has already spoken about it with the seller. So their response might be, yeah, we kind of expected it. What did it come in at? We're prepared to cover the first 15 grand or whatever. And we're like, yeah, 25 low. So we'll cover the other 10. Great. I'll write it up. And now we're back on track.